All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for yet another Patio Conversations. I think this is the third round of the different themes that we're covering, and we're excited to come back to the question of material and construction histories, which is led by theme director Gauri, Bharat, and myself. It is one of the areas that I'm particularly passionate about. Of course, construction histories in itself is an interesting area of looking at architectural history, moving away from the object or the artifact of architecture to understanding the underlying processes, which brings us into the world of labor and materials. But I particularly value the opportunity to look at materials as a way of understanding architecture and its place in society. So the studying of course, components of the building, but we're moving away from looking at technology from a technological determinism towards this idea of histories of how materials and buildings are shaped by social, cultural, and economic dynamics within particular regions or sites of their deployment. With that kind of basis, we're delighted to have two researchers today whose work invite us to think about brick as a material. Again, one thing that I'm quite passionate about, was part of my own sort of research for a long time. And we're using the brick as a lens through which to read history, ecology, power, and place. So we'll hear a lot more about that, hopefully, from our speakers today. So I'll do just a quick introduction to the speakers and the topics of their presentation, and then we will jump directly into the presentations without any gap in the middle. So our first speaker today is Sprya Sharma, an architectural research and PhD candidate at the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi, where her work focuses on the making of colonial Patna. She holds a master's in architecture in architectural history and theory from CEPT in Ahmedabad, and has published across several edited volumes on themes ranging from vernacular housing in Bihar to streetscapes of Patna. And she has also taught at CEPT University, AP Goyal, Shimla University. I will also put in slightly longer versions of the bio in the chat in case you want to catch up a little bit more on the details of the work that everybody's done. Sabrina will present her presentation titled Politics of Bricks, where it's a talk that asks us to sort of reconsider brick as both craft and ideology. And she moves from the intricately carved chaturams of Tanjore to the arrival of this idea of British architectural morality. She traces how colonial interventions sought to discipline
I'm actually
Indian
hearing
masonry
you
traditions.
echo. There's echo.
Okay, thank you. Is there a continuous echo from what I am saying, or is that somebody's?
No, I think somebody had left their mic on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sorry for that. Maybe I'll just present a little bit of the topic again. So Saparia's presentation is called Politics of Bricks, where it's a talk that asks us to reconsider brick as both craft and ideology, moving from the intricately carved chaturams of Tanjore to the arrival of what calls British architectural morality. She traces how colonial intervention sought to discipline Indian masonry traditions, displacing centuries of local artistry. So her talk posed a pointed question: did colonialism teach Indian masons something new, or did it make them forget what they already knew? So we'll be very interested in finding out what details we've got there. Our second speaker is Akshar Gajjar, an architect and researcher currently pursuing his PhD at EPFL in Lausanne. He studied architecture at CEPT University in Ahmedabad and holds MAS in urban and territorial design from EPFL in Lausanne and ETH in Zurich. His research sits at the intersection of architectural material production, ecology, labor, and territorial change, and he's co-author of Living Together: More Than Human Ecologies of Architectural Thinking. Akshar's talk is titled Brick Ecologies, a study of brick making in the agrarian landscapes of Charotar, Gujarat, where fertile soil that grows paddy and cotton is also the raw material for kilns nested within the farmlands. His work reveals how brick making quietly transforms land, making agricultural plots susceptible to speculative urban construction, a process entangled with structures of caste, class, and state power. Rather than tracing a linear commodity chain here, he follows unexpected itineraries of bricks, animals, and people, asking what these movements reveal about the imperateness of urban expansion within rural ecologies. After the two presentations, we will have Nachiket Chanchani as a respondent. Nachiket is an associate professor in the history of art at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, a distinguished historian of South Asian architecture and visual culture. He's the author of Mountain Temples and Temple Mountains, and his work has been supported by institutions including the Getty Foundation and the Smithsonian, and we'll look forward to hearing more about that later. So I will call upon Sprya to sort of share her screen and start with the talk.
Can you see it?
Yep. Yeah.
Is it visible?
Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm a bit nervous, but I'll be fine. And mine is a 20 minutes presentation because I thought we have to make 20 minutes presentation. And I would also like to specify that my research is not specifically on brick. Rather, I try to locate brick in my different studies, in my different projects. And then we have tried to connect dots. So we'll start with a story. So there's a village in Bihar, which where no home, they don't make any roti at home. And the legend goes like this, that there used to be a king and he was so scared that somebody would come and attack his empire. He prayed to God for a long time and then God gifted him a small slave monster and said, if you feed this monster every single day with something you eat yourself, it will grow into a big monster everybody's scared of, and then nobody can attack you. So King thought a lot, and King himself, he loved mangoes and wild berries and meat and some exotic sweets. But he said, but that it was not practical to feed this monster with these things. So he after a few discussions and thought, it was decided to feed the monster with these rotis. And it was a very smart decision because roti is something which can be grown on land, and the skill set to make roti is there in every household. And the grains can also be stored for the next season. So it was good. So he started this new kitchen and he said, okay, we'll make roti here for the monster so that I can keep track on quality of rotis which are made for monster and the size of it. But there was a problem. People were so busy making roti at home and they all were eating it that the material for making roti for the monster was not enough. So King came up with another idea. Nobody is going to make roti at home. That was the order. And hence, they are not making roti still today. The thing is, can you hear me? Okay. So the thing is, there are two things here. This is not a true story. I just made it up. But if you replace brick by bread, it's a true story. Exactly this was happening. When government want to create something big, build something big, people were stopped from making bricks. My take is brick is a bread, it's a roti. No, it's not ready-made, but it can be made from common earth or something which is grown on earth. Some people avoid it, some like it a lot. For some, it is do roti ka sawal, just ek pakka ghar ho jaye. And for some, it is gluten, it's unhealthy. The composition might change from place to place of both roti and bread, and it might change from home to home. So my topic is politics of bricks, and my name is Sprya Sharma. So it was 1767, and East India Company decided to build something big. Most probably it was about a fort. And that time they outsourced it to the contractors because they calculated it was way cheaper to outsource this construction of 240 lakh bricks. And they were saving around 1 lakh rupees, which was a huge amount at that time. But then there was a problem. The contractors who were given this contract, they complained that workers were busy making bricks for private people in the town. And then there's the shortage of workers. And this was slowing down the company's work. So company said, okay, we have to come up with strict control. This rule was there even before that, but they said, okay, we need more bricks now. So no one should make brick without permission. This ensures workers are available for the company's project. And I'm not making any assessment here. This is documented in the archive. So this is from 1767, and I checked this document very late, but I had checked this one from 1924, and this is about. This is from Vidhan Parishad debate, and Dulu Manki, who was the first Adivasi elected member of Vidhan Parishad, he's asking question from J.R. Dan, and he's saying that his second question is it a fact that tenants are not allowed to reap even the fruits of the trees standing on their recorded land, which they rear to bring up? There must have been some incident like this. But the answer, what J.R.D. said, he said, no, it's not like this. The answer is negative. But his first question was, is it a fact that in some cases the tenants have been punished with the fine for preparing bricks for their own use from the soil of their own land? If so, why? Most probably it was about Adivasi people, and the answer is yes, because such action is in contravention of Section 21 of the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act, unless the landlord's sanction is previously obtained. Who is the landlord here? Landlord is government. And the Section 21 says that tenants cannot use land in ways that change its nature without the landlord's permission. And if we go to the timeline, again, it was the time when new capital Patna was getting constructed and there was lack of bricks. So this rule was reinforced at the time. So this rule is even there nowadays, and I'm not advocating for or against the rule. I'm just asking what happens when people are stopped from making bricks and are forced to make bricks for one authority. It standardizes bricks. It doesn't allow room for experimentation, and it diminishes expertise. And we'll see how these three things were very important when we talk about history of brick in Indian context. So we were talking about 1767. It was the same time period when Marathas used to rule Tanjore. Tanjore, where there is a Brideshwar temple, which was constructed by Cholas in the 11th century, and the place was known as Dharam Rajya. When Marathas took over, they wanted to consolidate their rule in that place, and along with temples, they also constructed chatrams. So chatram were the guest houses built for the pilgrims, the normal people who were crossing Tanjore to go to Rameshwaram. And these structures were very important for the king. They had royal patronage. And when we read what Safoji, when he lost control over most of the Tanjore, he writes letter to British resident that although these chatrams didn't originate with me, I consider them as attached to my house and essential to my reputation and happiness. So they were also, most of these chatrams were named after their wives or mothers. And the king also used to do a lot of charities through these chatram. These places, and the place had to look royal, something that belongs to a royal family. And that's why it's very famous for its intricate brick carving. It looks very unique, but it was for normal people. It belonged to the royal family, but it was for normal people. So royal treasury was limitedly available for them. Here, the builder had to construct something which looks unique without spending a lot of money. It was not like making a big temple where they take granite, they carry a granite, take it from somewhere, and then transport it, carve it. That was not possible. What was possible is brick. And they had to make brick unique. So in Chatram, trying to achieve what patrons had imagined, the builders had to make the conscious choice of available material and explore the skill set already existing in the region. The place had a skill set of brick making, mortars, brick carving, bricklaying, but all these things were experimented here. They were made different to make something unique out of brick. The brick type had to be like this, that it is soft enough to be carved. It doesn't get damaged when the internal parts of it are exposed to weather or pollution. The shape and size of the brick had to be like this, that it suits the building aesthetically as well as structurally. The mortar joint had to be very strong but very thin, that it looks like a homogeneous mass. And then they had been doing carving, but they were carving stone or wood. So they could think in three-dimension, they could create three-dimensional carving, but the material was different. The material response was different. While carving a brick, there can be any sudden air vent in it, or the brick might chip off. So they had to experiment on their existing skill set with brick. And it was not just, it had in steps. Step by step, they had to work on different skill sets to create something unique from a normal material because our budget was limited. And they had the skills because they didn't learn it in 5 or 10 years. They learned it in years from their families, in guild, from generation to generation. If I read from Ramaswamy's paper, it is for a long time, beginning from the theorists like Max Weber and Karl Marx, caste has been regarded as a major cause of India's economic and technological backwardness. Marx, commenting on the fineness of Dhaka muslin, in fact concludes on note of irony by saying, it is only the special skill accumulated from generation to generation and transmitted from father to son that gives to Hindu, as it does to spider, this proficiency. And we can see that these people were able to see, the builders were able to see the brick different from its past use, see how it is used in capitals, column capitals here as of words. And they looked at the brick as a medium and process, not as an end product. It can be anything. It can be used for carving, for construction, for decoration, or even as balusters. So I once took one class which was about theater and architecture, and we were asked to find trickster in architecture. Trickster, we all know, is somebody who uses his or her intellect or illusion to trick somebody, to challenge the authority, to challenge how things had been used, to just demolish it. And brick is here. It's not a passive material of construction. It's an active participant that wants certain forms. It's like a poem or riddle. Sometimes it's hiding something, sometimes it's hiding itself, and sometimes it's mimicking stone. So brick is a trickster, and brick is seen as a process, not just as a final product. But why it is used in Tanjavur? It's used because it can be made from common earth. We see a similar pattern in early 20th century. Two capitals were getting constructed. One was provincial capital Patna, other was central capital Delhi. And in provincial capital Patna, hardly any stone is used. There is very less use of stone. Even the main structures like secretariat and governor house, they all are made of brick. Well, such things were not happening in central capital Delhi. They didn't have such budget constraints. This is the photo of brick field from when this new capital Patna was getting constructed. And we'll see how brick making was seen. So this is a document about the Patna University, and they are asking for 3 lakh rupees for the land preparation and on-site brick making. But the money for land preparation was given 1 lakh rupees, but it is said that on-site brick making is not a separate activity. It's a part of a project. And unless all architectural drawings and estimates are ready, we cannot make bricks. Now, they were supposed to make bricks on the site because it was seen as cost efficient. And also the excavated areas were planned as artificial lakes. But it was not. We can also see how, so brick making was a part of project. It was not a different project. Again, how brick making was seen in steps. So how payment of this brick making was done, it was done in advance on different steps. It was for earth preparation, sun-dried bricks, burnt bricks, and then coal supply. But who were the people who were, it's a very labor-intensive process. And who were the people who were working on it? It was Indians. And British didn't like how Indians were working with brick. So here is the consulting architect Ransom. He's saying that he's talking about bad brickwork in the work of important buildings. But what is more important, I will read what he's writing. The native will do excellent brickwork when he likes. on irrigation works in the jungle, it is hardly worthwhile for him to employ his superior art. It is in important building when he lays himself on to please, that he colors his mortar, he chips his bricks, and rules force joints over infinite patience because he thinks the result is pretty. So it wasn't like Indians were lazy, they were working with patience, but they couldn't take just bricklaying as a final thing. If we can do something out of it, the inspiration were coming from places like Tanjavur. Why can't we make something out of it? The problem was those bricks were not for brick carving. British, maybe they wanted something like this. Indians couldn't. So the problem here was British were not liking the way Indians were making fake decorative techniques. They were chipping bricks, they were coloring mortar, they were making false joints. And this came with the solution that there should be on-site training. The Indians should be strictly told how to construct, and there should be strong supervision so that they don't use their brain to beautify everything. Just do brush what what government tells them to do. Just construct like this. Don't use your brain. Don't make anything beautiful. But the consulting at a ransom, he's like, no, like I don't believe that he was bringing the worker, and he said we should import English bricklayers. Obviously, government didn't agree because it was expensive. So they didn't agree to bring English bricklayers. They didn't agree to bring British technology as well. So when a technical officer, he saw Hoffman kilns in Italy, he was like, wow, it's such a great thing. It saves so much of space and cost, and it's so efficient. You can work throughout the year, you can make bricks, and you can make so many bricks in such small space. And we must have this in India. But the government response was, where labor is cheap, I believe that men are better than brick machines. The focus was on cheap labor over industrialization. Also, there was patent issue. The Hoffman agent asked for payment, but the British authorities said Crown is not legally required to pay patent royalties. So the technical knowledge stayed with Europeans. So they wanted Indians to make bricks like British, work like British, and demonstrate craftsmanship like British, but they didn't want to spend as much money as was spent on Europe on construction. They wanted quality, but at low cost. And it was ultimately about money. And maybe that is colonialism is. Communist states are different. So communist states, they want to build more. When it was USSR, they wanted to build more and build fast and catch up and overtake USA. And Nikita Khrushchev has said, we have no excuse for continuing to employ the old methods of working. Everyone knows how much time and labor it needs to make brick. So why use brick? Instead of brick, wouldn't it be better to make concrete wall sections? This is when you create in masses. The government is creating huge structure. That can't be possible. That's not possible everywhere, especially in present day India, where you make it step by step, slowly, then you use brick. This is an image from Hollywood Basti in Ahmedabad. They construct their houses for years. They keep collecting bricks from demolished buildings. They keep taking it, keep constructing it. And it take years. Even they don't have even doors or roof on their houses, but they have pakka house. They have the brick house. Sometimes they don't even have money for mortar, so they use cow dung. And I met this family and they were very happy. They said, everybody has a brick house here, but ours is a colorful brick house. Everybody know colorful brick house is ours. And brick is not just for construction. It also makes possible to walk on roads of this basti. So I met this lady and she said, we have been living here for generations. Now government wants us to vacate it suddenly. How is it even possible? This is a pakka brick house. They can't demolish it. The thing is, brick doesn't always come after the confidence that you are permanent here and you will have a brick structure. Sometimes it is after building a brick house that you gain confidence that you are now permanent, just like this lady had. but not everywhere we have bricks. So this is a photo from a flood hit region around Kosi area, and these people they dismantle their houses every year during monsoon. They carry it to the safer place, come back with their houses, and they make their houses again. They don't have this confidence. They don't have any brick structure in their place. So brick is not everywhere. That's it. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks.
I'll share my screen.
Yeah, Akshar, if you can share your screen.
Is good?
Yeah, that looks fine. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I will begin by thanking Gauri and Amit and the Patio Network for this very kind invitation, and Sprya for this brilliant presentation before mine, and also to Nachiket for agreeing to engage so generously with my work. My doctoral project, which is tentatively titled Making Brick, Tracing Relational Geographies in Gujarat, is based at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, EPFL, where I work with my thesis supervisor, Sarah Nichols, and my co-supervisor, Dibjani Bhattacharya. As I speak to you today, I am actually in Anand, not too far from Ahmedabad, precisely a week into my longer fieldwork. Hence, what I will present today draws from my preliminary fieldwork carried out last year in the monsoon months and some initial impressions from the ongoing fieldwork. And hence, it goes without saying that this is very much a work in progress presentation. And hence, I'm very excited to have this opportunity to get some feedback from everyone here, especially on the methodology that I use through my research. The presentation is titled Brick Ecologies, Farm, Soil, and Land at the Edges of Urban Expansion. This close-up image of the earth on a brick kiln in Gujarat shows evidence of various systems that intersect. The red soil has arrived from nearing farmlands. The varying footprints of men, women, and children have migrated over 1,000 kilometers to work on the kiln. Donkey paw prints show a close reliance with animals, whereas scattered agricultural waste is seen all over the ground. This vignette from the kiln hints at brick as a significant building material whose making sits at the intersection of crop production, animal, land, and soil use, and internal migration patterns. I'm interested in understanding the territorial relations that underpin the production of this material as well as its construction. I start with this diagram on the right, even though it is a little bit outdated now, as a conceptual representation of my project. The central question is, how does brick production in Gujarat participate in territorial transformation through reorganization of construction, labor, land, and life? I study this by anchoring my study in preliminary 5 field sites. So you have the brick kiln, the farmland, the construction site, the migrant village, and the coal mine. And I draw from Philip Rakasowitz's map of the Great Wheel of Africa, where he uses the analogy of gears, where wheels turn simultaneously to change territories at the same time, rather than simplistic sort of arrows from one point to another. Hence, I'm interested in studying these 5 sites as relational to one another. And in today's presentation, what I'm going to do is focus on the 3 that are the closest to each other: the kiln, the farm, and the construction site. Anand region, the district that you see here, is bordered by Mahi River on the right and Sabarmati and Vatrak rivers on the left, both of which have over years brought alluvial and black soil depositions, creating a very unique mix of black alluvial fertile soil, which gives the name Charota to the region, meaning sort of fertile and beautiful land. And at the same time, the region is also a host to a dense concentration of brick kilns that rely predominantly on exactly the same soil that the farmlands rely on. And the interesting thing to see here is also that Anand is a major node in the national level development projects, such as the Golden Quadrilateral project, the Bullet Train project, and also is a fast growing mid-tier city, which makes this site as an interesting study to understand what the current urban expansion and construction is predicated on. To understand the ecologies of brick production, I ask, how does this material mediate the relationship between agriculture, land, and construction, and as well as urban expansion? Here I draw on important work coming from urban studies on figurations of peripheral urbanism by Caldera and agrarian urbanism by Shubhra Gururani that have demonstrated how urban production is co-produced by peripheral landscape, particularly agrarian lands in the case of India. As I was driving around the eastern edge of Anand district last year, I stopped at a brick kiln. Munna Bhai, the brick manager, approaches me and on hearing my interest, proclaims, "You have come at a wrong time. Bricks are not made right now." He was not the first one to tell me this. I had heard this on almost every brick kiln I had visited in the months of July and August in 2025. Brick making is intrinsically linked with the temporalities of season and weather. The open air process of making brick comes to a stop in monsoon for nearly 4 months, and migrant brick workers return to their home villages. As you see here, the period between the October and May when bricks are made is colloquially called the brick season. And monsoon, by that logic, from somewhere between June to September, October, is known as the off season, the wrong time to come study the brick. The reoccurrence of wrong time revealed that the only time that the bricks were fired and molded, the time of action, so to say, is considered important to the understanding of the making of brick. Although, it is in this moment of off-season that I came across unexpected movements of cows, goats, their shepherds, and various baked and unbaked bricks around the brick kiln, on the brick kiln as well as in the rural surroundings. And I got interested in asking this, what do these individual journeys of these objects and these people tell us about brick production? And to attend to these unexpected objects and their movements, I turned to the concept of itineraries. The notion of an itinerary highlights the nonlinear character of an object's mobility and the subsequent changes in its context and roles. Itineraries describe pathways that do not lead directly to a given goal, but take an irregular and convoluted course with multitude of meanings. Each itinerary is short and partial, as you will see in a moment. It is not a complete biography of an object, but a trail that illuminates a specific relationship. And it is this specific relationship, a potentially a territorial relationship, that I'm interested in with my project. On a brick kiln near Borsad, in the off-season, one of the surrounding fields, as you see here, which is normally used, which is a part of the brick kiln and is normally used for laying bricks in the brick season, has been converted into a paddy nursery for the Kharif, that is the monsoon season. So what happens with paddy production here is that people who have access to another plot of land will grow the seeds over there, allow them to mature for about 25 to 30 days. And once the seedlings have germinated, they submerge the nursery in water and then manually uproot the shoots and then replant them on the actual field. What this does is it retains the fertility of the soil in the main field and hence gives a better yield. The brick kiln in the wrong time first turned into a temporary farmland, a nursery for paddy shoots to sprout before continuing their journey on the main field. Much of the scholarship on brick and agriculture emphasizes the antithetical relationship that the two have, predominantly because of the usage of soil. Although not untrue, the itinerary of paddy shoots illuminate another part of the story, looking at which draws attention to their short but significant pause on the brick kiln, and also the conditions of the brick kiln, that of abundance of water and the climatic conditions and the clayey soil that allow this to take place. At the same time in monsoon, brick kilns become overgrown with a lot of grass and shrubs and creepers that climb over these huge stacks of bricks. And as I was walking around the kiln, a shepherd guided his herd of goats into the kiln grounds, which had become ideal grazing spots. The situation here is beneficial for both the shepherd and the brick kiln manager because the manager has to get the vegetation cleaned before the start of the season. In recent decades, with the expansion of neoliberal construction, the fallow land grazing areas as well as the commons in villages known as gauchars have sharply declined. 77% of India's cattle farming is reliant on these common grazing lands for their sustenance, in the absence of which pastoralists and herders, especially in Gujarat, have to be increasingly reliant on private land to feed their cattle. Brickens here figure as these new grazing lands. Attention to the itinerary of cattle is key here in understanding the plural usage of land. And I want to sit here with the term land use, for example, which is a very fixed category when looking at maps and official documents. But as Professor of Politics and Development Nikita Sood argues, and I quote, not only is land conceptually multidimensional, it is also mutable. That is, the meanings, materialities, and uses we accord to it change. This land may occupy different conceptual registers simultaneously, end quote. This becomes evident here as the land use is not absolute, but it adheres not to the individual parcel of land, but rather to the season in which we currently are. I am now jumping into what is called the brick season, the on season, and these are some images and sketches from 1 week of fieldwork, where I'm following the itinerary of castor seeds. In Gujarati, it is bivel, which is used a lot along with to preserve wheat for a longer period of time. The relationship between brickmaking and agriculture continues from cattle to crops. On the kiln, as the bricks are burnt in this huge structure, Suleiman, name anonymized, a Jalaiwala worker, a firer from Uttar Pradesh's Kasganj district, tells me that he fires 12 lines of bricks, as you see here, in one day. And he opens this black tawa to reveal this hole here and pushes small heaps of castor seed pods with his leg down into the hole. And so the coal and the castor seed pods together become the fodder for brick here. Once these bricks are fired, they are removed from the kiln by another set of workers known as Nikashiwala. They come from the tribal district of Dahod in East Gujarat. Ajay Bhai, who stands on top of the brick mound, is removing the bricks from the stack and giving it to the other workers, placing them on their heads to take them to the nearby tractor. Dahod has the highest population belonging to the scheduled tribes group in Gujarat. Historically subjected to extreme socioeconomic marginalization, they have been relegated to some of the most dangerous and lower paid labor. I draw here extensively from the works of scholars such as Alpasha, Jens Lersche, Mukta Nayak, amongst others, to understand how brick labor operates within the complex constellation of migration, caste, gender, skill, and generation. Here, what is also further interesting is that not only is the agricultural relationship limited to the cattle and the crop, but Ajay Bhai himself is a farmer when he returns to Dahod, where he farms his land for the duration of the monsoon. He tells me that he can only farm when it rains because the land is rocky underneath and hence cannot hold a lot of water. As seen here, the rainfall map from 1998 to 2019 in the Dahod district has been extremely fluctuating, because of which they cannot grow more than one crop in a season, even though they would want to, which is the reason they return to the brick kilns year after year. I'm interested here in understanding of how rainfall and fertility of soil, and thereby the rural ecologies, even of the distant landscapes, are one of the reasons for migration to brick kilns. Here, the itinerary of the farmers themselves from Dahod to Anand become of interest. Until now, we've been on the brick kiln, looking at sort of movements of goats, cows, shepherds, etc., to understand how kiln as a site is embedded within local agrarian ecology and economy. Now I'll zoom out briefly to look at the kiln itself as into the larger landscape. The ground on which the brick kiln stands here is itself agricultural. This is an evolution of one brick kiln in the outskirts of Anand as it grows from one farmland to many. The predominant way in which they occupy the land is through 5-year tenures that are on rent. And as the production grows and the demand grows, they start acquiring more and more land around the same piece to not have to construct the kiln again. And this stands here for a few decades until they are able to use the soil from the 10-kilometer radius around the kiln. And once the soil availability becomes less, they move on to another site. And in many cases, agriculture takes over again. But what grows in these lesser fertile soil changes. As is seen in the case of Gujarat, the tobacco production has increased by 200%, while crop production of food crops has reduced. Soil is key here. Some shepherds that you actually saw in the picture earlier in the region, they also double as soil brokers themselves. Bharwad, a pseudonym again, he takes his 40 cows to graze in the area every day, and in the process has become very well networked and aware of the socioeconomic conditions of farmers and landowners. And then hence works as a soil broker since 2007, gaining a very in-depth understanding of the soil types. As he tells me, and I quote, "For bricks, you need red soil from farmland. In Gujarati, lal godamti mati. That is not too sticky or too sandy. When there is mud, which is these small white pebbles in the soil, then it can neither be farmed nor used for brick making," end quote. And as I take a lump of this clay mix on the kin and rub it on my notebook, which is a mix of soil, water, and paddy seed husks, I understand what he means. It sticks, but not too much. Bharwad calls the selling of farm soil mati utarvi, which literally translates to descending the soil. The emphasis on the descent rather than the removal is quite telling, because the first descent is that of the ecology of the land, where the fertility of the soil is lost. But this fertility is also relative. If you remove 2 feet of soil, he tells me, then you can manure it for 2 more seasons and potentially regain some of its fertility. But if you go deeper than that to 3 to 4 feet, you start having pebbles below that do not allow you to farm anymore. Furthermore, the soil fertility does not adhere to the legal boundaries of the land. As you see here, the depressed land becomes a sucking, sort of draining, becomes a lower basin to suck water from surrounding farmlands that are being irrigated, as the subsurface water moves from the higher hydraulic level to the lower hydraulic level, which means that the depressed land becomes a water basin, attracting water from surrounding fields, impacting the hydrology of the region. This descent is also social. In this area, there are 2 main farming castes, the Patels and the Darbars. The former, being social and economically more secure, are said to never sell their soil, while Darbars are more likely to do so. Marwat tells me, between 2007 and 2025, I have never descended the soil from a Patel farm. My interlocutors point to the descended lands, fields lying below the road level, as belonging to Darbars, while those that remain elevated as associated with Patel ownership. The land here becomes a physical register of soil extraction and the socioeconomic differences that come with. What I'm interested here is in understanding how the regional narratives of caste shape these itineraries of soil. And as a next step, I am keen to compare the land registry with the soil levels that I see during my fieldwork to see if this stands true. The third descent that is associated here is that of the economic value of the land itself. There is a relationship between the movement of soil and the value of land. The more soil is removed from the land, the more market value it loses. Therefore, in the areas where there is higher land value, people would hardly sell their soil. Once the soil is removed from a farm, it reduces its price. This devaluation of these depressed lands make them attractive to speculative developers who purchase it cheaply, convert its land use because it is now a fallow wasteland that cannot do a lot of agricultural production, and build single-family housing or multi-use apartment blocks that are quite ubiquitous in the region onto these lands. And this is as you leave Anand City, you start seeing these blotches of development projects coming up onto previously agricultural lands. They do not necessarily follow a linear trajectory of sort of leaving the city and moving out, but actually are linked to a lot of these soil movements themselves. And before I end this presentation, I will briefly take you on the construction site where I have just started going in the last 4 days, where the bricks have reached to be constructed in the wall. The itinerary of a brick on a construction site, from when it arrives on the ground floor to when it moves to the upper floors for wall construction, is also quite telling. The brick arrives in a tractor and gets arranged in stacks, as you see here, On this particular day that I was visiting the site, one woman and two men, all three of whom are migrant workers, carry the bricks in stacks of 12 each to the second floor. Two masons from Gujarat work on the wall from two sides and are further assisted by two workers who bring the mortar and two other people who bring the brick for them to lay them effortlessly. The division of skilled versus unskilled labor around the same material here not only is based on where the workers come from, but it also denotes how much they get paid in doing this amount of work. I am indebted to the work by Habitat Forum in HAF in Ahmedabad, who have studied the relationship between skill, downskilling, and upskilling, and its relationship to the construction industry within the region. In this presentation, I have looked at the triad between brick-kiln construction and agriculture. And by following individual itineraries of each of these objects and actors, what has happened is a constellation of is created of all the different kinds of movements that come to fore when one looks at brick production and brick consumption. And the ambition of the project is to look to sort of keep growing these constellations, not only in scale, but also historically contextualize them, which I've slowly begun to do, to understand the what Amit said in the introduction itself, very well put, that to understand what the current construction and the material production is predicated on. And I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akshar and Sprya, for those fantastic presentations. I'll just invite Gauri to sort of give a quick overview and invite Nachiket to respond. But just a quick reminder, if you've got any questions for either of the speakers, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll pick it up a bit later.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Sprya and Akshar. It was delightful to go back in place, time, landscape, and to hear about your work from different parts of the subcontinent. I'll hand over to Nachiket. Thank you, Nachiket, for agreeing to do this. And yeah, over to you.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Perfect. So thank you, Gauri and Amit, for inviting me to participate. And thank you both, Sprya and Akshar, for really kind of thought-provoking presentations. I thought I might just kind of share some ideas that came to mind as you were presenting your work. And these are kind of addressed or to both of you equally, to both Akshar and Sprya equally. One is kind of the issue of how you understand kind of the word resource and what kind of resource do you see brick as? Is brick, for example, a scarce resource? Is it a plentiful kind of resource, inexhaustible almost? Who decides? Who does not decide? And as we're thinking about kind of the situation kind of in Anand, where kind of brick kilns are competing with agricultural land, with kind of pastoral land, with peri-urban and urban land, what kinds of pulls and pushes are there that kind of inflect kind of understanding of that resource? In the case of Patna or Tanjavur, etc., what kind of resource is the past for the builders? Is the past also a certain kind of a resource, some a material that they can look to as they create perhaps new designs or not, right? Maybe for the British, the past was not a resource, but for those who were working in those regions before the British came, the past was a certain kind of a resource. And so that's one issue to think about. Another is just about standardization and simplification. Bricks are so often kind of connected to ideas of standardization. They have, of course, mold-made and have been mold-made for a long time. However, as I was listening to both of your talks, I thought maybe we can kind of write new histories of what standardization and simplification are, how these are related or not, how useful are these as heuristic kind of tools in thinking about architecture. Because in both cases, we see a certain kind of complexity that is kind of emerging, even as we are working towards the production of certain standardized commodities. And that might be something to reflect on. A third was kind of just issues of caste, which is that in the case of Akshar's kind of presentation, caste seems to be kind of present in many different ways. For example, there are people of different castes who are working at brick lanes themselves. What are kind of their own dynamics? And to what extent is kind of agricultural work and brick production work connected to certain kinds of caste transformations? Are these are not kind of hard and fast groups. You mentioned, for example, how both kind of the migrant workers as well as those who are on site both keep cows. So cow keeping and kind of brick making are kind of practiced by the same communities, and yet there might be certain kind of caste negotiations that are going on. Similarly, kind of in the South Indian cases or in the cases from Patna, how does caste kind of feature in? I also thought we might think a little bit more about kind of energy, right? Both of your talks mentioned kind of issues of labor, agriculture, construction. Uh, how do we kind of factor in energy? Brick kilns need huge amounts of biomass to kind of run them, whether it's coal, whether it's wood, whether it's other kinds of material. Um, where is this energy kind of coming from? How does the firing of brick kilns change microclimates? Working in brick kilns is not easy, and I think as each summer kind of comes by, in addition to the summer heat, in the brick making season, people are dealing with kind of that. How do we kind of factor in both of that historically as well as in the present? And then finally, a term that I wanted to suggest to both of you is kind of thinking about kind of the term ecological succession. This is actually kind of a concept that ecologists have thought about, that what happens when a certain kind of habitat, for example, is transformed. So, for example, what happens if a forest is cut down? It's not as simple as, well, just kind of nothing grows there. There are other things that kind of grow there. Maybe kind of trees don't grow as quickly as they did previously, but maybe lantana grows, maybe shrubs grow, maybe cactus. And what grows kind of occurs not kind of in a clear kind of or in a haphazard manner, but there is a certain kind of a logic to how kind of things unfold. And so I think similarly, kind of with landscapes that are kind of being impacted by brick kilns, both in the past and in the present, how might we kind of use this idea of ecological succession? It's also kind of connected to productivity. It's also connected to kind of value. It's connected to how different people kind of inhabit it and use it or not use it. And maybe it might be a useful framework rather than kind of ideas of evolution or other such phrases that both of you used. So I'll just leave my comments to just that much, but thank you. And I look forward to just the conversation as it will unfold now.
How do we do this? Sprya, you wanna?
Yeah, I was just going to say, do one of you want to pick, or Sprya, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so somebody's asking me a question here first. So
maybe Sprya, if you have any responses to Nachiket,
Okay.
we can take that. Or Akshar,
Okay.
if you have some responses to Nachiket, then we can move to the questions in the chat.
Okay.
I can begin then. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Akshar.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nachiket, for these very thought-provoking questions. I will jump through them sort of swiftly because they have been a part of my thinking process. And to your question on standardization, it is quite interesting because I tried understanding what Sprya has done in more detail of when the British also tried to bring the standardization to India. And in some cases it did work, and in some cases it did not. But that was sort of the end of my historical analysis for now. But what is interesting on a brick kiln is how the knowledge is mediated at every level. And it differs not only from brick kilns to brick kilns, but it differs from day to day. So you've, for example, got soil, and today the soil came from a farm that was very good, very rich in sort of this alluvial content, that it did not need a lot of rice husk in it along with water to be made. But the day after, there was a shortage in soil and the brick kiln had to dig its own soil. And then that was one of the days I was there, and one of the brick molders, he shows me, he's like, I'm pulling this brick off and the corners are pointy and they come out pointy. And now my owner is going to come to me at the end of the day and show me all the broken corners because they are pointy. But it's not my problem. They use their own bad soil from the brick kiln. And that is the so sort of, and then he's like, okay, then I'm going to add a bit more sand on my own end to make it work. And because he's sort of contracting on number of bricks and not number of hours. And the same thing goes on the construction side. The contractor sort of screams at the mortar mixer and he's like, make it a little bit thinner. And then in the next round, make it a bit thicker. So I think there is this tension between the the supposed understanding of what standardization of a material means, but at the same time, it gets mediated at so many levels by so many actors. To the question of caste, it has been something I'm really working through at the moment. And it comes up in almost all of my conversations around brickmaking at the moment. So you've got a very, very diverse set of caste on the kiln itself. So the firer is different from the molder, and who's different from the one who removes the brick from the kiln itself. And I keep reminding myself that I'm an architect by profession. And hence, I will have to look at this question in the way I am best suited to, where I am trying to understand at a territorial scale the movement and what physical relationships exist. So a small vignette of which was the Dahod case, where the scheduled tribe workers are coming from Dahod to Anand, but they are themselves farm workers. And now I'm interested in understanding the physical characteristic of the land that they own back home. So the goal is to sort of maybe go there and understand, and then historically also understand that relationship. But at the same time, I'm also very interested in studying their houses on the brick kiln and how from worker group to worker group these houses change, and what that also tells us about where they come from and what caste they belong to and things like that, while building very much on the critical scholarship that has come up from fields like sociology and human geography, etc., on these relationships. So, Parya, do you want to go a little bit, or should I?
I just have a few points to say, and I think first of all, for simplification, obviously it did happen when we started, when we had very big, when we had a different viewpoint to construct, when we started to construct differently, and also when we had bigger projects. Okay, so it was not like we are trying to show it to somebody that we can make something nice out of bricks, as in case of chatrams. So it was, if we were going to construct a fort out of many lakh brick, we had to standardize this. The British had to standardize this, and maybe it happened slowly from there. And in case of caste, I found one interesting newspaper article, and then there was one caste, a Heer caste, and they were complaining that it was our fort. We used to do brickwork, and then now Muslims have also started to do this. And not everybody should, because it should remain with us. And I'm not saying, because, when it was kind of standardized and we were not experimenting with brick. Earlier, when I talked about the skills which was developed through generation, it was one thing, but when it was standardized, there was no use of, even if you had learned skill, it was of no use. So, but still there was some competition, maybe because of employment, because people, they wanted still work, even in like early 20th century, they were complaining about this thing, that this is our caste vote and not other, everybody should get into this thing. So, and to all other points, I'm just thinking through it. So I won't make any comment for now. Thank you so much.
Did you want to add anything, Akshar?
I can briefly touch on resource and energy, and then maybe we can take the questions in the chat. The question of resource is very interesting, because many different people throughout the chain have different understanding again of this resource and its abundance. So if you're on a construction site, brick is abundant because it doesn't matter. So like I have seen brick kilns in Anand that supply to Surat, for example, or that supply to Rajkot, which are considerable distances for such a bulk commodity to travel. And which makes me think about how different people have a different, and what resource it is, because not everyone looks at brick also as a resource per se. Because on a brick kiln, then the soil is a resource, or the paddy husk or the castor seed pods, etc., are husks, but the brick becomes sort of an end product or an object at that point. So I am also unsure a little bit how I don't use the word resource so much, in my own work so far because I'm a little bit uncomfortable with it, maybe. It evokes some of the past sort of discussions on environmental services or ecosystem services and stuff like that. So I refrain from it. And on the question of energy, um, I do agree with you how we understand the microclimate that is the kin itself and also its surrounding. And in that, I am very much interested in working with sort of farmers around these brick-in regions to understand how sort of it has impacted, if at all it has impacted cropping patterns or soil fertility itself, and also to historically understand its relationship to the the agricultural revolution as well, because I'm also very sensitive here to not put agriculture also as a naturalized quote unquote category. Because in this part of the region with the Mahi Canal system and everything, it is very much a constructed category in itself, this monocultural production. So I think there, which sort of very briefly ties again to your ecological succession question, where, for example, Vinay Gidwani's work shows that when the canals were produced in the region, there was so much grass that started growing in the fissures of the canal construction and the land that the shepherds, the Bharwads, became very independent suddenly. And hence they become so entrepreneurial that they started buying these tractors and JCBs and started becoming soil brokers, for example, as one of the things. And so there is this relationship between the caste dynamics changing when a certain infrastructure comes and changes the ecological capacity of the region and so on. So there are these. And that would be, I'll keep it brief.
Thanks. Saptarshi, you had your hand raised. Did you want to come in? You're muted.
No, I'm happy to have everybody ask their questions. I was the last
Okay.
to raise my hand, so just be fair.
Okay, cool,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
All right. Sprya, there's a question you can see in the chat from Kanishk Prasad. I can read it out. You mentioned the existence of brick as a prevalent technique that local masons fell back on when making chatrams. Have you been able to trace any historical trajectories of the predominance of brick to the particular region of Tanjore?
I think all this we just talked about, Chatram, is what we concluded from the structure. And that this must have been happening. And we don't have any, we don't know because I haven't been to Saraswati Mahal Library, which is our library there. So I can't say anything through archives here, but this is how, because as God, this studio was also about hidden history. We were trying to understand what must have been happening just through the structure. So it's there. So it was just our understanding.
I'll just add there, Kanishk, in fact, the last material histories PATIO conversation that we did had Priya Joseph, who was a studio tutor, and her book looks at a history of brick in the Tanjore region. So that might be something to take a look at. Akshar, there's a question for you. To what extent has the growing adoption of RCC and concrete blocks reduced traditional brick production? And what are the implications of this transition on agricultural land use and surroundings?
Oh, sorry. Yes. So in Anand region still, there is, even if the brick use as load-bearing material has reduced quite a bit, their use as infill material is still quite predominant. So much so that on all of these sort of at least 10 different brick kilns that I have just had very cursory look at, and some of them in detail, none of them have actually shared their growing anxiety towards the phasing out of the brick, which is actually something that is seen very rapidly in the north, around New Delhi especially, where there was a very high concentration of brick kilns and the resultant pollution that was sort of seen in the past decades. That move is a little bit faster up there. So I'm interested also in looking at that kind of a transition that's happening there, that is ahead of the curve, let's say here, or if that even happens here. I interestingly found a person who now has a fly ash cement block company who used to be a brick owner himself before. And so he was able to share some of the dirty secrets of the industry without being implicated by it anymore. And he was very hopeful to switch because he assumed there are a lot of government subsidies and government support in transitioning, which actually is not the case yet here. And so he's still struggling in bringing the faith in the RC, in the cement, fly ash, brick block, and things like that. So that is where the current state is, and I'm keen to follow it through my work.
Sorry, I don't want to jump in. I'm sure there's another question to go through, but it's an extension of the same question, Akshar. So I just wanted to find out, with the soil types, is there a particular challenge as well? Because I do know that, in the Gujarat region, there is issues with efflorescence that comes because of the sort of salt conditions. So that also affects the way, and then victories of when brick was popularized again, sort of, the sort of this IIM kind of period and whatever. So it goes up and down, but I don't think the story is purely about RCC taking over. I think it has also got to do with the quality of the material that is available for the brick itself. So do you have some insight in that as well?
Yes, and so as I said already, the day-to-day soil type changes a lot, the kind of brick that's coming up. But the expectation of the brick's performance also changes that. So, for example, I went to a couple of brick kilns, not in Anand region, but a little bit outside, that cater particularly to these exposed brick projects. So either these are all facing bricks. And so their concern with the soil type, color, and texture is paramount. So much so that they test their soil from different parts of Western India, from as south as Mumbai to north within sort of Rajasthan and in Madhya Pradesh as well, to bring soil. Of course, the brick costs much more than a normal brick. And so there, the regime around testing the soil and making sure it has a certain elasticity, but not too much, um, is of very much importance. So you are correct. There is a lot to do with the soil, and yes, I hope that
Yeah, the
answers.
reason I brought it up is it was a very interesting thing that I was looking at a while ago, because people who are coming from outside and don't understand these details treat brick, as we often hear, as something that can be locally produced everywhere, but it's not true.
Hmm.
The soil types make a lot of difference, and an example of that was in Louis Khan going to Bangladesh and using the wonderful soil there for brickwork, and then coming to Ahmedabad and expecting to do the same thing, and you get completely different outcomes from that. So
Yeah.
how people see sort of brick, like brick has this sort of capacity to be seen in this kind of homogeneous way as, all right, anybody can create brick out of the soil in their backyard, but it doesn't always translate at that. So I think that's a really interesting thing, and especially because you're bringing this whole idea of farmlands and stuff into it. It would be interesting to sort of see what soil types, how they operate in the context of agriculture, and how soil types operate within the context of brick building, and how those intersect in the kind of circles, overlapping circles that you're creating. I have a methodological question, but I'll wait for a second before I go there. Yeah.
Maybe you want to ask that question, Amit, because the next question we have is about how
No, but I
agriculture
remember
may create a
Saptarshi had his
collection.
hand up as well, so
Yeah.
I
Okay,
was
okay.
waiting for that one. Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks Saparya and Akshay for like fascinating presentations, and I really enjoyed seeing both the works. My question is to Akshay. Firstly, knowing as Sarah Nichols is your supervisor, I enjoyed seeing the Anthropocene square meter kind of slide that you began with, which was very telling. I mean, and it was good to see it in a new context. I actually have like a couple of questions, so I'm going to go through them very quickly. First is I was curious as to where you kind of identify the field alignment of your work. Like, what is the discursive field? Like, are you thinking of this as an ethnography? Are you thinking of this as a history? I mean, where do you position the work? I mean, because, and you don't have to answer this question now, it's just something to think about, because there's quite a, depending on where you're coming from, where you're positioning it, or are you trying to in some way resist those disciplinary silos and say that we can write a history through this method, which, I mean, Amit also had a method question. The second thing I was curious about is that when you're tracing these itineraries, as you very eloquently call them, of brick, when you take the human figure of the human into account, and you've spoken about the more than human sort of entanglements of it as well, I was wondering, especially from the caste and class perspective, that does do these ecologies of brick making somehow, do they fix social stratifications as they are, or do they actually enable certain kinds of mobilities? Or, and is it even productive to think in terms of that kind of a binary? This is the second thing I wanted to know. And the third thing was that, we are sort of having this discussion with colleagues here about the concrete humanities, and where it becomes very important to position cement and concrete and sort of position it globally. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on how do you position clay bricks globally, in terms of like clay bricks in South Asia, and the fact that their production is still so prevalent within the global shifts in material systems. And I mean, I'm sorry for these series of questions, but I mean, that's also a testament to how thought-provoking your work is, and I wish you all the best. But I mean, any kind of ideas or thoughts you might have had on these points?
The first one is the very interesting one. It's the third time it's coming, so I must address. In I am not resisting the silos per se very actively. And what I am, in terms of an approach, what I'm interested is in what Foucault has called history of the present. But then scholars like Anne Stoller have been able to sort of look at it in a more detailed and more nuanced post-colonial geographies. And so I do place myself work very much within sort of an architectural ethnography kind of a discursive field. I don't know what else it would speak to. My co-supervisor usually tells me that anything I read I find interesting. So that's the direction I start taking, like a sheep in a
I'm
herd.
curious, which stage are you in right now?
So I am in the beginning of my second year.
You can widen right now, and then you can focus it.
Exactly.
This
So
is
I
the
mean
time to have fun. Yeah.
So the idea is to follow these itineraries I came up with this construction for now too also. So that's not something I'm married to, but to follow these different actors that come about when I am looking at the brick. Because the initial attempt that I had was really following the thing method, that sort of the Ian Cook comes up with, and then you have a lot of things happening in that lineage. So Anna Singh's mushroom at the end of the world, or things like that show up in that lineage. And so that's how I started looking at it. But following the brick became a little bit restrictive, because then I was very much following one linear narrative from one place to the next and things like that. And if suddenly the castor seeds showed up, I was a little bit disoriented and things like that. So I allowed myself the capacity to break through it. And so the methods are very much coming from anthropology and architectural anthropology, so to say. So I draw a lot and things like that. But let's see where the discursive field ends up. The second question is also, yes. I think what would be more interesting for me next is to go from brick ecologies to also brick economies, and then see how these two allow me to have a discussion on caste. And I would like to think, and some of my work so far has shown me, that ecology would also be a very productive space to think about caste with. The short example that I gave you, that sudden growth of a lot of grass due to irrigation project allows a Bharwat community person to suddenly have entrepreneurial capacity and sort of not be reliant on someone else's grass and things like that. Does something that allows us to understand this caste as a dynamic rather than a fixed thing. And the last one, I have the least answer to, I would say, at the moment.
I
One
was
thing that I
wondering
can
if it's worth thinking about, basically,
Yeah.
because I think that There is obviously kind of position what you're doing within certain global debates, but also there are some things about it, as Amit said very nicely, which are very particular to the context that
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about. So those particularities matter, is all
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying. That
Mm-hmm. No, that definitely is true, and that's why I'm really sitting with the like there is at least for now not an attempt to, for example, compare this with the predominant brick belt, let's say along the Ganga,
Hmm.
Brahmaputra brick production and things like that. To for now sit with the specificity of this region that is quite particular in itself. But what is global about these bricks here is there is a huge market in UK for bricks from the region. And there is a little bit of work that is happening already in understanding this kind of an export market from Gujarat, which of course is linked to these new ports coming up, easing the movement, but also at the same time, the soil in this region is better than other parts of the state, and so on. And also because UK's climate emission calculation does not count carbon emitted outside its sovereign boundary as its own. So if the brick that was handmade and burnt with coal comes from someplace else, it doesn't matter. And so I'm interested um, in that conversation, but I don't know how much capacity I will have in the next 2 years to do that. But it goes back to what Amit said about different soil category, soil qualities for different kinds of brick. And so for export brick, that is very clear. The soil has to be a certain type, but also different testing regimes. They do frost testing for these bricks in Gujarat to send them to the UK and things like that. So that would be sort of my global thread for now. And then I will later come back to you on how that evolves.
No, definitely. I'd love to stay in touch and see how the work develops. And thanks for your responses.
All right. If I'm okay to jump in now, I think I said my question was methodological. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's more probably around theoretical framework rather than methodology per se. But and I'm also hoping, so it's a little bit of a challenge. So we'll see how you respond. But I think it will also help maybe my sort of in a little way try and address the question of criticality that Isaac has raised, and we'll sort of see if it does. So my thinking is we use the term non-human or post-human or whatever, and it's kind of becoming part of the discourse. I really want to hold you accountable to the idea of the non-human, because the problem kind of becomes is that we use the non-human, we talk about the brick, but ultimately we end up talking about people, whether it's caste, whether it's skill, whether it's economy, and it kind of becomes about people in the end. So the thing I was thinking about, and Nachiket brought out the idea of what kind of resources brick, and the word resource, which actually you had a response to your discomfort with it, and also Sapriya kind of talked about skill in that same sense. So the way I'm looking at it kind of reminds me the British anthropologist Tim Ingold has got this book called Making, and he makes this clear distinction between material and object, and it's an interesting sort of distinction of how when we look at something and we think of it as a material, we have a particular kind of approach to it, which is where words like resource and skill kind of kick in, because it is the possibilities of that object to become something else that we are interested in. And when we look at it as an object, we do tend to think of it as having some kind of completeness in its own. So it has its own history, its own becoming, and all of that. So I think in studies like this, I think I often sort of find, of course, there is a value of looking at this, because Akshar, with the stuff that you're doing, it is fantastic because this is an object which is very much inside architecture, which is material as we think about it in architecture, kind of then intersects with something that's outside architecture, and we start realizing that it is the same material, but it's completely different once you get outside the sphere of how architecture defines it. And I think, Sapre, in your own kind of case also, you can sort of see it when the community defines it in terms of sort of craft, what is inside and outside. So the question I'm coming at is that when you're doing that, can you or are you trying to be faithful to the idea of this thing as an object, or do you kind of find yourself going back and forth between its identity as an object and its identity as a material, And does that change the outcomes that you get? I know it's a pretty heavy question, and I don't think that there'll be a clear answer, but I think this is worth discussing because I think I see a lot of those kind of slippages in a lot of people who want to talk about the non-human, but then end up getting stuck in the trap of talking about humans through non-humans.
I'm taking a minute to take that in.
And also hold the thought,
Um,
Akshar, if you want, and just kind of you don't have to respond. That's my cue to tell you. Can tell Amit,
yes.
this is a longer conversation. Let me come to Adelaide and do this. But feel free to respond if you want to say something.
No, but even on a sort of personal exploration, have you struggled with the idea of thinking about brick as an object and a material, and has that kind of sort of, and if it
Mm.
hasn't, that's fine. Is that something that you find might be valuable to consider?
I have mostly looked at it as a material, I will be honest, and hence, and also as a confluence of materials in itself. Then it becomes a material, and then it goes on to become sort of something else. So I don't necessarily have the issue of the object and it becoming sort of frozen. I am not 100% sure if I understood your argument around the non-human and the fact that the the bringing up of the non-human precedes the human or the other way around. But I will share a couple of thoughts on why this attempt to forefront ecology at the moment, which is that much of the discussion in Gujarat that happens right now, not only in architecture, is very much concentrated on the questions of caste dynamics and how that affects the politics of the state, given the history of the state, and things like that. And that is where my frustration comes in, which is that a lot of the environmental history within the subcontinent focuses either on these mountain regions or the hills, because that was then linked to subaltern studies. But not a lot of environmental study comes from the plains, let's say. And Gujarat is more or less, with a few exceptions, and at least the central Gujarat region where I am based is very much a plain. Where I suspect there is a lot of ecological relations that underpin these relationships. And that then also shows up in the architectural education that I was part of, and a lot of my peers were part of, where the ecology takes a backseat because a lot of social concerns are very much present. So it's also a provocation to myself to actually think through the ecological question. And then at every point, the human comes in, and I don't see that as a problem necessarily. But then the human comes in relation to what I am looking at. So if the grass is coming up, then there is someone who's linked to it, or the rice paddy, because I would not just stop at the paddy field on the brick kiln, but then try and understand who is the person who's growing the paddy here on the brick kiln, and what is their relationship to the brick kiln owner, and things like that. So just the presence of paddy there is not enough to then talk about the ecology of brick, let's say. So I would not necessarily remove one from the other at the moment, at least. And I can maybe get back to you in 6 months or so, or a year.
I don't know if Supriya has to say anything, but all right, yeah. So, no, definitely, it's a heavy question, and I think yeah, it's a longer conversation to be had. So thanks for that. But I will leave you with the thought that what you're indicating, which is a discussion of ecology, which has been around, of course, for a long time, is what you're explaining in an object within an intersubjective domain. So, how people interact with each other through the world of objects. But the newer framing of non-human kind of comes from creating an interobjective domain within which humans are sort of the intermediary, but the relationship is between objects. So I think that would be an interesting thing to look at. You know, while I'm not saying that the subjective components are not there, but it would be interesting to sort of see how we position the object so that it doesn't obviously get subsumed by other intersubjective narratives. Anyway, thank you for that. There's a few other questions on the chat, so I'll let Gauri get on with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We have two questions, and I am mindful of time. We've been here 90 minutes. So, well, the first question is rather general. So I was wondering, it's really about how architectural history is a collection of facts in Indian institutions rather than a critical investigation. So I was wondering whether anyone would like to respond to that. Um, yeah, I have lots to say on that, but we'll be here another 90 minutes. So I will desist and say that I don't think, if anybody wants to step in, but I don't think that's the whole truth. Things are shifting, and I think there's definitely more that's happening across the subcontinent in various institutions. But yes, the average history lecture still has some bit of Bannister Fletcher and Percy Brown, but hopefully we're moving away from that. Anybody wants to share anything,
Can I
just please.
use this as an opportunity to sort of sidestep the question a little bit and say, well, that's why Patio exists, so that we can have the
Exactly.
conversations and maybe, institutional discussions and discussions like this have their own positions. And of course, within institutions, histories can be taught in certain ways. And then research discussions and discourse can have different places where we could do that, which this would be a good place to do that. Anyway,
I
yeah.
wanted to just add one line to that I think this Indian exceptionalism is very problematic. When anybody who teaches history anywhere in the world, and I'm realizing it, is when you're doing a curriculum-based teaching, it has certain limits, and that's to add to what Amit said about Patio, that that's why we have platforms like these, because the moment you have to teach a course, I'm not saying we have to do Bannister Fletcher or Percy Brown, but it is restrictive in its own way. There are certain mandates and agendas to follow within institutional spaces. I'm talking about the survey course, not like an elective.
Yeah, but also, I'm guessing what we're talking about here is undergraduate education, where survey courses are the basis of this. People and very few, and I'm only aware of CEPT as a program where there's a master's in architectural history where, we go beyond those things. I think, yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think that's the important points, that curricula are what they are. So, but the next question, and that's the last question, which is really coming back to the idea of resources that you mentioned at the beginning. And Nachiket, I wondered if I mean, you could take the last word on this. The Kanishk Prasad is talking about Anupama Kundu, who works with local materials, which are like a regional byproduct, such as using coconut husk to bake bricks. And how would you think about this? Of course, the person is asking everyone, but how would you look at this question of resource? I know you posed the question, but I'm wondering whether you had any thoughts on this.
Well, I would want to think about it, but at least for now, I want to say just maybe kind of a more flexible kind of idea of what is resource. Kind of we need to kind of bake that into kind of that, because otherwise resources kind of governed by such kind of Marxist kind of frameworks and certain kind of ways of thinking. But as Amit also said a little while ago, kind of if we bring in somebody like Sittim Ingold or others who are working with materiality, we get or with vibrant matter, then our understanding of resource is much more contingent. And maybe that's what we need to move towards. But it's a great question to continue thinking about.
Yeah, I think we'll see a very interesting set of new research that will come out where that question changes, because I think the resource and economic framing has been so overbearingly present in the way we think about materials that I think that shift will be very valuable.
Great. Then I think that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Sprya. Thank you, Akshar. And thank you, Nachiket, for sharing your work. And everyone who's attending, we'll have this again next month. So please keep a lookout for the next patio session. And we look forward to seeing many of you there. Thank you all very much.